The television courtroom had never witnessed such a moment of pure governmental arrogance meeting its absolute destruction. Sarah Martinez, a 32-year-old parking enforcement officer who had spent 4 years wielding her badge like a weapon against anyone who dared question her authority, sat in the defendant's chair with the kind of smug confidence that could only come from someone protected by union contracts and institutional indifference. Across from her sat Michelle Thompson, a 29-year-old single mother and nurse whose hands trembled as she clutched a folder containing 5 parking tickets totaling $500, every single one issued while her car sat properly parked in her own residential driveway. What happened in the next 20 minutes would cost Sarah her career, expose a pattern of badge abuse spanning 4 years, and trigger criminal charges that could send her to jail. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Sarah didn't just lose her case. She didn't just get embarrassed on national television. What Judge Judy uncovered was so much worse than parking tickets. This was about a government employee who turned municipal code enforcement into a personal revenge operation, targeting a working mother for 8 months because of a single noise complaint. The evidence Judge Judy compiled would expose not just Sarah's abuse, but an entire city's failure to protect residents from a bully with a badge. Before we show you the exact moment when Sarah confessed to retaliatory harassment on national television and triggered an investigation that would destroy everything she built, you need to understand who these people really were and what brought them to this explosive confrontation. Because this wasn't just about 5 parking tickets or municipal code violations. This was about what happens when someone gets a uniform and a citation book and decides that badge makes them untouchable, that questioning their authority deserves punishment, that they can weaponize government power against neighbors who dare to stand up to them. Sarah Martinez had been running this scheme for 4 years, targeting anyone who challenged her, hiding behind procedures and protocols while terrorizing residents who lacked the resources to fight back. She had faced 14 complaints, issued hundreds of retaliatory tickets, and gotten away with it because her supervisors looked the other way and her union protected her from consequences. What Sarah didn't know was that Michelle Thompson's case had landed on Judge Judy's desk with red flags everywhere, that a research team had spent 3 days compiling evidence of Sarah's pattern of abuse, that social media posts Sarah thought were deleted had been recovered, and that text messages bragging about making Michelle's life hell were about to be read aloud in front of millions of viewers. Hit that like button right now if you believe people who abuse government authority deserve real consequences, not just slaps on the wrist from their own departments. Make sure you subscribe because what Judge Judy reveals about Sarah's ticket scheme and the text messages that prove premeditated harassment will absolutely shock you to your core. Trust me, the next 20 minutes will restore your faith that bullies with badges eventually meet someone who doesn't care about uniforms or union contracts, only evidence and justice. This parking officer walked into that courtroom believing her badge protected her from accountability, that her job gave her the right to punish people who disrespected her authority, that a working mother living paycheck to paycheck couldn't possibly fight back against someone with government power. She was about to learn the hardest lesson of her entitled career, that Judge Judy spent 25 years as a family court judge dealing with people who abused positions of trust, that every condescending answer Sarah gave was digging her grave deeper, and that the moment she admitted those tickets were retaliation for a noise complaint, her career was over. Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who craved authority over others, who saw rules as weapons to control people rather than guidelines to serve communities. Growing up as the youngest of 4 siblings, she had learned that being bossy and aggressive got her attention and respect from family members who were tired of arguing with her. By high school, she was the hall monitor who wrote up classmates for minor infractions with gleeful satisfaction, the student council member who reported dress code violations, the neighbor who called code enforcement on people whose grass was half an inch too tall. Her personality was perfectly suited for someone who wanted power without the education or training required for actual law enforcement. When she couldn't pass the police academy entrance exam after 2 attempts, she found her calling in parking enforcement, a job that gave her a uniform, a badge, and the authority to issue citations without the oversight or accountability that real police officers faced. For 4 years, she had been living her dream of having unchecked power over residents who couldn't fight back, who had to accept her citations or spend time and money contesting them in traffic court, who learned quickly that challenging Sarah Martinez meant becoming her next target. What made Sarah truly dangerous wasn't just her aggressive enforcement style or her inflated sense of authority. It was her complete inability to separate her job from her personal feelings, her belief that anyone who questioned or criticized her deserved punishment, her willingness to use government power as a tool of revenge against neighbors who had the audacity to suggest she or her family might be in the wrong about something. She kept mental lists of people who had slighted her, tracking addresses and patterns so she could find violations to cite, waiting for opportunities to issue tickets that were technically legitimate but clearly motivated by personal animus rather than public safety. Her supervisors had received complaint after complaint about Sarah's behavior, but union protections and the difficulty of proving retaliatory intent meant she faced nothing more than occasional verbal warnings to be more professional. Sarah had learned the system perfectly, understanding exactly how to stay just inside the boundaries of her authority while using that authority to terrorize anyone who dared to cross her. Michelle Thompson represented everything that Sarah Martinez had learned to target during her 4 years of weaponizing parking enforcement against vulnerable residents. At 29 years old, Michelle embodied the quiet strength of single mothers everywhere who sacrifice everything to provide stable lives for their children while working jobs that barely cover basic expenses. She had moved to Ridgemont 18 months ago after her divorce, scraping together enough money for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street that would give her 2 children, ages 4 and 7, a safe neighborhood with good schools and a yard where they could play. As a registered nurse at County General Hospital, Michelle worked 12-hour shifts that often turned into 14 or 16 hours when the emergency department got slammed with patients, pulling double shifts whenever possible because the overtime pay meant she could afford things like new shoes for her growing kids or occasional trips to the movies that made them feel like normal families. Her 2012 Honda Civic wasn't fancy or new, but it was reliable transportation that got her to work and got her kids to school and daycare, and she took meticulous care of it because she couldn't afford repairs or a replacement if something went wrong. Michelle kept her property neat and well-maintained, mowed her lawn every week, shoveled her sidewalk in winter, and made genuine efforts to be a good neighbor to everyone on Maple Street, bringing cookies to new residents and volunteering for neighborhood watch meetings because she wanted to build the kind of community where her children could grow up feeling safe and connected. The nightmare that would consume 8 months of Michelle's life began with something so mundane and reasonable that she never imagined it would trigger a campaign of governmental harassment that nearly destroyed her financially and emotionally. On a Tuesday night in late September, Michelle had just gotten home from a brutal 14-hour shift at the hospital where 3 trauma patients had come in from a highway accident and the emergency department had been absolute chaos from the moment she clocked in until the moment she left. Her feet ached, her back hurt, and all she wanted was to kiss her sleeping children goodnight and collapse into bed because she had another 12-hour shift starting at 7 the next morning. But at 11 p.m., just as she was finally drifting off to sleep, loud rap music started pounding through the walls from 3 houses down, bass so heavy it made her windows vibrate and woke both of her children who came into her room crying and confused about the noise. Michelle tried to ignore it, tried to settle her kids back to sleep with promises that the noise would stop soon, but when midnight passed and the music was still blasting on a school night, she made the decision that would change everything. She pulled on sweatpants and a jacket over her pajamas, walked 3 houses down to Sarah Martinez's address, and politely knocked on the door to ask if the music could be turned down so her children could sleep and she could get rest before her morning shift. Sarah Martinez answered the door with an expression of pure annoyance, as if Michelle was the one being unreasonable rather than the family playing music loud enough to wake the entire block at midnight on a school night. When Michelle explained the situation as politely and non-confrontationally as possible, Sarah cut her off with dismissive irritation that made clear she had zero intention of accommodating her neighbor's reasonable request. "It's not even midnight yet," Sarah said with an eye roll that suggested Michelle was being ridiculously uptight and oversensitive about noise that was barely loud enough to notice. "Stop being so dramatic about a little music. My son is having friends over and they're just having fun. Maybe if you weren't so high-strung, you wouldn't have problems sleeping." Michelle tried once more to explain that her children had school in the morning and she had to work an early shift, but Sarah had already dismissed her and started closing the door with a final comment about how some people need to learn to mind their own business and stop trying to control what their neighbors do in their own homes. Michelle walked back to her house feeling frustrated and disrespected but hoping the music would stop soon now that she had made the request directly. Instead, the music got louder, pounding until nearly 1:30 in the morning while Michelle lay awake listening to her children toss and turn in their beds, unable to sleep through the noise that seemed deliberately amplified after her complaint. The next morning, exhausted and running on 3 hours of sleep before a 12-hour shift, Michelle made the decision that would mark her as Sarah Martinez's primary target for systematic harassment. She called the Ridgemont City non-emergency number and filed a formal noise complaint, explaining the situation calmly and factually to the operator who took her report and assured her that someone would follow up with the Martinez household about noise ordinance violations. The city noise control officer visited Sarah's home that afternoon and issued a warning that playing loud music after 11 p.m. on weeknights violated municipal code and future violations would result in fines. Sarah received that warning with barely contained rage, not at herself or her son for breaking noise ordinances, but at Michelle for having the audacity to involve the city instead of just accepting that Sarah's family could do whatever they wanted without consequences. In Sarah's mind, Michelle had committed an unforgivable act of disrespect by going over her head to authorities, by suggesting that rules apply to the Martinez family, by refusing to just deal with the noise like a good neighbor who minds her own business. That noise complaint became Sarah's justification for 8 months of calculated revenge using the one weapon she had at her disposal, her parking enforcement authority and her citation book. Exactly 1 week after the noise complaint, Michelle walked out of her house at 7:15 in the morning to drive to her hospital shift and found a bright orange parking ticket tucked under her windshield wiper. The citation claimed her vehicle was obstructing the public sidewalk in violation of municipal code, with a fine of $100 due within 30 days. Michelle stared at the ticket in confusion, looking at her car parked exactly where it always parked in her residential driveway, at least 6 feet back from the sidewalk with a clear path for pedestrians. She took photos with her phone showing the obvious clearance between her car and the sidewalk, gathered the ticket and her evidence, and filed a contest with the city traffic court. 2 weeks later, a traffic court judge reviewed her photos, agreed the citation was improper, and dismissed the ticket without penalty. Michelle felt relieved and vindicated, assuming the ticket had been an honest mistake by an overzealous officer who had misunderstood the vehicle's position. What Michelle Thompson didn't understand at the time was that dismissed tickets meant nothing to Sarah Martinez except confirmation that she needed to be more persistent in her harassment campaign. 2 weeks after the first ticket was dismissed, Michelle discovered another citation on her windshield at 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon, this time claiming improper parking in a residential zone despite her Honda Civic being parked in exactly the same location in her own driveway where it had sat for 18 months without issue. Michelle photographed the evidence again, contested the ticket again, and watched it get dismissed again by a traffic court judge who seemed increasingly puzzled by why this particular address kept receiving citations for violations that clearly weren't occurring. But Sarah wasn't deterred by dismissals or judicial rejection of her citations. She was playing a longer game, understanding that even dismissed tickets cost Michelle time off work to contest them, cost her stress and anxiety about potential impacts on her driving record, and sent a clear message that Sarah could make her life miserable whenever she wanted. The third ticket came on a Wednesday evening claiming Michelle's vehicle was blocking driveway access, which would have been physically impossible since it was Michelle's own driveway and her car was the only vehicle using it. The fourth ticket invented a completely absurd violation, claiming Michelle's Honda Civic sedan was a commercial vehicle illegally parked in a residential area, a citation so obviously fraudulent that the traffic court judge who dismissed it actually commented that someone needed to review the officer's understanding of vehicle classifications. The fifth ticket came on a Friday afternoon with the same generic claim as the first, vehicle obstructing public right-of-way, and by that point Michelle had spent 6 unpaid days off work attending traffic court hearings, paid $800 to a lawyer who was trying to get the city to investigate the pattern, and was living in constant anxiety about what citation would appear next on her windshield. What Sarah Martinez didn't know as she continued her systematic harassment campaign was that Michelle's lawyer had submitted the case to Judge Judy's production team with documentation of the clear retaliation pattern, and that Judge Judy's research team had immediately recognized this as something much bigger than a simple landlord-tenant dispute or damaged property case. Judge Judy Scanlon had built her legendary reputation on an almost supernatural ability to spot bullies and abusers of power within seconds of meeting them, and when she reviewed the initial case file showing 5 tickets to one address with 0 tickets to any other home on the same street in the same time period, every instinct she had developed over 35 years of practicing law started screaming that this was a government employee weaponizing her authority for personal revenge. She assigned her research team to conduct the most thorough investigation they had ever undertaken on a small claims case, telling them to dig into every aspect of Sarah Martinez's enforcement history, her social media presence, her complaint record, and the city's response to previous allegations of harassment. What they uncovered over 3 days of intensive research made Judge Judy's blood boil with the kind of righteous fury she reserved for people who abuse positions of trust to hurt vulnerable victims who lack resources to fight back effectively. Judge Judy's team started by obtaining Sarah Martinez's complete ticket writing history from the city through official records requests that Ridgemont couldn't refuse without triggering public records violation lawsuits. The pattern that emerged was damning in its clarity and impossible to explain as anything other than targeted harassment. In the 8-month period when Michelle received 5 tickets, Sarah had issued 0 citations to any of the other 21 homes on Maple Street despite residents parking in identical ways to Michelle's driveway parking. The team then expanded their analysis to adjacent streets and found normal distributions of parking violations, confirming that Sarah was capable of finding legitimate violations when she wanted to but had deliberately avoided ticketing anyone near Michelle except Michelle herself. They interviewed 6 neighbors on Maple Street who confirmed they had never received tickets despite parking configurations that were identical to or worse than Michelle's situation, with one neighbor named Tom Wilson laughingly admitting he literally parked his truck across the public sidewalk every single day and had never once been cited by Sarah or any other enforcement officer. Another neighbor named Jessica Chin provided the smoking gun that would destroy Sarah's entire defense, recounting a conversation where Sarah had explicitly told her she was teaching Michelle a lesson about respect and making sure she understood that filing complaints against the Martinez family came with consequences. The most devastating evidence came from Sarah Martinez's own social media accounts, which she had assumed were private and protected from scrutiny despite posting publicly about her enforcement activities and her personal grievances. Judge Judy's research team recovered a Facebook post from 2 days after Michelle's noise complaint where Sarah had written "Some people need to learn respect for authority," a post that had been quickly deleted but remained archived in Facebook systems and recoverable through proper legal channels. They found an Instagram story that Sarah had posted showing a photo of Michelle's house taken from the street with a caption reading "Karma is coming," posted just 3 days before the first parking ticket appeared on Michelle's windshield. But the absolute nuclear evidence that would end Sarah's career came from text messages between Sarah and another parking enforcement officer. Messages where Sarah had explicitly written "Watch me make her life hell" with tickets and bragged about having the power to punish people who disrespected her. These text messages proved beyond any possible doubt that Sarah's enforcement actions were motivated entirely by personal revenge rather than legitimate code violations, transforming what might have been defended as overzealous enforcement into clear-cut governmental abuse and civil rights violations. Judge Judy's team also uncovered Sarah's body camera malfunction pattern, a detail that proved Sarah understood her actions were wrong and was actively working to conceal evidence of her harassment. While other parking enforcement officers in Ridgemont had body camera malfunction rates below 1%, Sarah's camera had mysteriously failed to record during 11 separate ticket writing incidents over 8 months, and every single one of those malfunctions occurred during citations that were later contested and dismissed by traffic court. The statistical probability of this being coincidental was essentially zero, making it clear that Sarah was deliberately disabling her camera when issuing retaliatory tickets because she knew the footage would expose her targeting specific individuals rather than enforcing legitimate violations. The final piece of Judge Judy's investigation involved tracking down 14 other residents who had filed harassment complaints against Sarah Martinez over her 4-year career, discovering a consistent pattern of retaliatory enforcement against anyone who questioned her authority or filed complaints about her behavior. Mr. Patel, who owned a convenience store, had received 8 parking tickets in 3 months after asking Sarah to stop blocking his loading zone with her enforcement vehicle. Mrs. Rodriguez had received 6 tickets after filing a complaint about Sarah's rude and aggressive behavior during a citation. Every single person who had dared to challenge Sarah Martinez found themselves suddenly receiving multiple citations for violations that either didn't exist or had been ignored for years before their complaints. The Judge Judy courtroom buzzed with anticipation as cameras captured what everyone assumed would be a straightforward parking ticket dispute, but the audience members who had been watching the show for decades could sense something different in Judge Judy's demeanor as she reviewed her notes one final time before opening the proceedings. Michelle Thompson sat at the plaintiff's table looking exhausted and anxious, her nurse's scrubs visible under her jacket because she had come directly from a hospital shift to make this court appearance, clutching her folder of dismissed tickets and photographic evidence like a lifeline. Sarah Martinez strutted into the courtroom wearing her official parking enforcement uniform as if the badge and patches would intimidate Judge Judy into respecting her authority, her citation book visible in the leather holder on her belt, her body language radiating the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for 4 years of abuse. Judge Judy opened the case with deceptive gentleness, asking Michelle to explain what had happened in her own words, and Michelle's testimony was heartbreaking in its simplicity and emotional honesty. She described being a single mother working 12-hour shifts to support 2 young children, explained the noise complaint incident without drama or exaggeration, and showed the 5 parking tickets with photographs proving her car was properly parked in her own driveway during each citation. When Michelle's voice cracked describing her children asking why the mean parking lady hated them and whether they had done something wrong, several audience members visibly teared up at the genuine pain in her words. Sarah Martinez's response to Michelle's testimony revealed everything Judge Judy needed to know about her character before Sarah even opened her mouth to present her defense. She rolled her eyes dramatically when Michelle mentioned financial hardship, smirked when Michelle described taking unpaid time off work to contest tickets, and actually muttered loud enough for the microphones to catch about people playing the victim card instead of just following parking regulations. When Judge Judy finally invited Sarah to present her side of the story, Sarah launched into a condescending lecture about her 4 years of experience in parking enforcement, her extensive training in municipal code violations, and her duty to enforce regulations impartially regardless of personal feelings. She pulled out her citation book and the municipal code manual as if these props would establish her authority and credibility, explaining that each ticket was legitimate even if traffic court judges didn't understand the technical violations she had documented. Judge Judy let Sarah dig herself deeper with every condescending explanation, asking seemingly innocent questions about enforcement procedures and violation patterns while Sarah confidently provided answers that would contradict the evidence Judge Judy was about to unleash. The turning point came when Judge Judy asked with deceptive casualness how many other tickets Sarah had issued on Maple Street during the same 8-month period when Michelle received 5 citations. Sarah answered without hesitation that she enforced violations wherever she found them and didn't keep mental track of every street's ticket count, clearly believing this response made her sound professional and impartial. Judge Judy's response was surgical in its precision and devastating in its impact. "I'll help you with the numbers, Ms. Martinez. 0. You issued exactly 0 tickets to any other home on Maple Street in those 8 months. 21 other homes, many parking identically to Ms. Thompson, and not one single citation. Would you like to explain that pattern?" Sarah's confident expression flickered as she realized Judge Judy had done homework that exposed the targeting she thought she had hidden behind procedural language. She stammered something about those other homes not being in violation at the time she conducted enforcement sweeps, but Judge Judy cut through the excuse by producing photographs of neighboring homes with cars parked across sidewalks, in front of driveways, and in configurations far worse than anything Michelle had ever done, none of them ever receiving tickets from Sarah or anyone else. Then Judge Judy dropped the nuclear evidence that would end Sarah's career in front of millions of viewers. She pulled out printed copies of Sarah's social media posts, reading aloud the "Karma is Coming" caption with its timestamp just days before the first ticket, the "Some people need to learn respect for authority" post from 2 days after the noise complaint, and finally the text messages that proved premeditated harassment beyond any possible doubt. "Watch me make her life hell with tickets," Judge Judy read in a voice dripping with contempt and disgust. "You didn't just admit this was retaliation, Ms. Martinez. You bragged about it to your colleagues. You celebrated having the power to punish a working mother for filing a legitimate noise complaint." Sarah's face went through a transformation that would be captured in screenshots shared millions of times across social media, cycling from confident smirking to shocked recognition to pure horror as she realized the extent of Judge Judy's investigation and the permanence of evidence she thought had been deleted or was protected as private communication. She tried to claim the messages were taken out of context, that Judge Judy couldn't use her personal social media against her, that private texts between co-workers shouldn't be admissible in civil court. Judge Judy's response was swift and merciless, explaining that Sarah had posted publicly, that the texts proved malicious intent, and that government employees don't get to hide behind privacy when their communications prove abuse of official authority. The final destruction came when Judge Judy revealed the pattern of 14 other harassment complaints, the body camera malfunction statistics that proved deliberate concealment, and the neighbor testimony confirming Sarah had explicitly told people she was punishing Michelle for disrespecting her. Sarah made one last desperate attempt to justify her actions by standing up and pointing at Michelle while shouting that she brought this on herself, that people don't file complaints against their neighbors and expect no consequences, and that she was just doing her job enforcing legitimate code violations. The moment those words left Sarah's mouth, even her own lawyer looked horrified because Sarah had just confessed on national television to exactly what Judge Judy had accused her of: retaliatory harassment using governmental authority as a weapon of personal revenge. Judge Judy's ruling was swift and absolutely devastating, awarding Michelle $3,900 in damages and then delivering the blow that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. "I'm forwarding complete transcripts and all evidence to the Ridgemont City Manager, the County District Attorney for Criminal Investigation of Official Misconduct, and the State Attorney General's Civil Rights Division for Pattern Investigation. Your career is over, Ms. Martinez, and you did it to yourself by believing your badge made you untouchable." Within 24 hours of the episode airing, the video had exploded across every social media platform with the hashtag #BadgeBully trending for 4 consecutive days as millions of viewers shared clips of Sarah's confession and Judge Judy's systematic destruction of her defense. Ridgemont City placed Sarah on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending investigation, and within 2 weeks she was terminated for cause after 40 additional residents came forward with similar stories of retaliatory enforcement. The county district attorney filed criminal charges for official misconduct, and Sarah eventually pleaded guilty to avoid jail time, receiving 300 hours of community service, 2 years probation and a lifetime ban from government employment. Michelle Thompson's life transformed in the opposite direction, receiving her full payment plus interest, finally able to park in her own driveway without fear, and eventually being elected to the Ridgemont City Council on a platform of accountability and reform. The case triggered municipal policy changes across the country as cities implemented oversight systems to prevent badge bullies from weaponizing enforcement authority, and Sarah Martinez became a permanent cautionary tale about what happens when people abuse the trust and power that comes with government badges. If you believe Sarah got exactly what she deserved for terrorizing a working mother with her badge, smash that like button right now and comment "Justice served" to show your support for holding authority figures accountable when they abuse their power for personal revenge.